the book has been, to be fair, a little awkward to deal with at times, it is chock full of important information for specifically people both coming into marriage and considering marriage and after marriage. And I would consider that like the three types of people in the world, wouldn't you? It's for everybody, and it's not, interestingly enough, it is not as difficult, though there are some things in it that are difficult to understand because they're cultural, for that matter. But a lot of them are intriguing. It's interesting the way they did things, especially as we talked about last week, the way you compliment a woman, I guess. I still think is rather hilarious, describing her teeth like sheep that have just come up from the wash, who are all pregnant with twins. That's just amazing. Now, it has an implication in the present at the time, culturally, both that her teeth were aligned relatively well and that they had matching sets, top and bottom, is the implication he's making. But just the comparison is rather intriguing. We are not in the same level of culture, we have a very different culture, I should say. And it seems like in Song of Solomon, specifically chapter 8, but even previously, not only do we have this culmination of the marriage, but then we have the determination to continue forward in that marriage. I believe one of the greatest detriments to the American culture in the 21st century has been the destruction or perhaps dismantling of the family. Many of the problems that we face, not only in our culture today, but in many pseudo-cultures around America, many of the problems that we face come from the disintegration or dismantling of the family. It is attacked on every side by a flippantly sexual culture, disregarding the importance of fathers and mothers in the home raising children, selfishness and immaturity in those being married and divorcing and remarrying at whim. I mean, the list goes on and on of the damage that the culture that we live in does to the marital union and the idea of marriage within the culture that we live. It is destroying the fabric of morality, for that matter, in our community. In chapter 7, notice in verse 10, if you go back just a bit, she says there, "I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me." The importance of maintaining not only a physicality with your spouse, but a desire toward them, not just sexually, but also, emotionally, and the need for companionship. When God created Adam, he decided that it was not good that he should be alone, but rather he made for him a helper, a companion, comparable to him. And this is entirely lost on so many of the community and the culture that we live, that they totally miss the benefits that the joy of married life can bring, potentially. Because in the community and the culture, in the media, they portray it as something less than what it should be. And they demean it, and they diminish it, and they destroy it, and they dismantle it. And the more they do, the worse our culture gets. And it's no surprise that their emphasis here in the Song of Solomon, notice in chapter 8, with me here in verse 1, look what she says. She says, "Oh, that you were like my brother." Now, that doesn't sound right to us. But if you keep going, it sounds a little bit worse at first, and then you get the idea. She says, "Oh, that you were like my brother who nursed at my mother's breast. If I should find you outside, I would kiss you. I would not be despised." The problem was that she had a desire to be with him, but one that even two married people in the culture wouldn't bring to the public light. It was intended to be a private thing. But she was very desirous of him, and if she could, she would kiss him in public. And that's all she's saying. She's not hoping that he's her brother, merely she's making the connection where I can go and kiss my brother, not in the same way that she would kiss her husband, but that I can do that, and that's a totally respectable thing. In verse 2, she says, "I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to instruct me. I would cause you to drink of spiced wine, of the juice of my pomegranates. She says there in verse 3, talking about their relationship, his left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. So she's talking about this relationship that she wants to continue developing, that she wants to be able to be a part of at all times, not just when they're in the privacy of their own home, and not in any crude way in this sense, but there was a very restricted quality to public displays of affection, you might say. And culturally, it was unacceptable to portray very much affection at all in the culture that they lived, and that's acceptable, that's okay. But she talks about, in a very magnanimous way, in a very desirous way of having a better relationship with him, of developing that relationship. And notice in verse 4. In verse 4, we come to this phrase that you should be really familiar with by now. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem. And that's interesting that she says it that way, because if you remember back to the previous 2 times she's used this, she charged them in relation to the does of the field. And in this case, she doesn't use it at all. She says, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. There is the warning for the 3rd time. The first time was in chapter 2 and verse 7. And overall, what she said was, if you want maximum joy and sexual fulfillment in marriage, do not allow sexual arousal to occur with anyone but the one God has given you in marriage. That is, a sexual relationship belongs in marriage, and to do it anywhere else, to perform it with anyone other than your betrothed, is to invite trouble into your marriage, into your future. In chapter 3 and verse 5, we have the second warning, to not elicit or to not awaken love until it pleases. In verse 5, chapter 3, she says, basically the context of her saying that is, in order to evaluate objectively the cost and worthiness of marriage to this person, do not cloud your judgment with sexual stimulation. It gets in the way. And there are so many people who refuse to accept that and run wildly into one relationship after another, and it causes all kinds of trouble that we can easily see all over the world today of the problems that it causes, not just with children that aren't necessarily desired in the context of the marriage life, but also of the emotional damage that it causes people, both within that sexual relationship and in future relationships that they'll have. And that's really where she's getting to here in the 3rd, this one warning in chapter 8 and verse 4. Premarital chastity makes the wedding night and all future experiences with your spouse that much better. Having no previous sexual relationships to overcome make the normal adjustments couples need to make that much easier. And you say, Chris, but what do you mean adjustments that couples need to make? Well, you are sharing a bed now, or perhaps you're sharing 2 beds. Someone's going to hug the covers. And you are used to sleeping by yourself, and now there is another body in the bed, and it is not always conducive to the way you have always slept. Their attitudes, their behaviors, sometimes they're going to leave their socks on the floor or their belts in their pants. I do that, it drives my wife nuts. And I've tried to be better, because she talked to me about it. There are adjustments that come. Sharing your life with another human being is a difficult thing. And some people conclude, entirely ludicrously, that the answer to this is, again, living in the relationship before you actually marry. That doesn't solve any problems, because you are engendering strong emotions toward the other person by having a sexual relationship. And it clouds the mind. It keeps you from making good decisions. But look at all the damage that it's going to cause into the future and all the problems that will come if you don't limit your sexual relationship to the marriage bed. It causes all kinds of problems. And being a newlywed or a long-time wedded couple is hard enough as it is. It is a struggle, it's a difficulty, it is work. And it should be. It's worth the work putting into it. And notice in chapter 8, if we go down to verse 8, they suggest that the family can help. And I think this is kind of funny. It's funny the way they put it anyway. I don't know if you've ever read this before. We have a little sister. This is the Shulamites' brothers. We have a little sister, and this was before She married Solomon. And she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she is spoken for? She is not as physically attractive as she would be otherwise, is their suggestion. And they want her to have a successful marriage. They want her, effectively, they want the family to be able to choose the best individual possible for their sister. They love their sister. Even though they make some bad decisions and they don't treat her very well always, they want what's best for her. And remember, marriage in the culture that is here is a fair bit different than our culture, and that doesn't make it wrong, it's simply different. And so they say, what shall we do for her? In verse 9, if she is a wall, we will build upon her. Well, what's that mean? We'll keep going. A battlement of silver, and if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. So she's either a wall or a door. And what do you suppose that means? It has to do with her sexual proclivity. It has to do with whether she is going to be freely offering that to others, whether she will personally protect her purity or not. If she is a shield, she is a person, he or she is a person who protects their purity. And if they are such a person, then you can adorn them as you would towers on a wall. You can adorn them with battlements. You can heap up praise to them and help them feel better about themselves effectively. And you don't risk them doing things they ought not do. But if she is a door, or if they are a door, that's a person who won't protect their purity. They let people pass that shouldn't. Then you build a wall around them. If they won't be a wall, you build a wall. And so you have this situation where her brothers come to the conclusion that they need to think about ways of protecting their loved ones. And I will tell you, so do we. We need to be a wall when it comes to our relationships, both sexually and intimately and emotionally. We need to develop the relationships with the right people, that is, our spouse most particularly. And we need to try not to develop relationships, obviously sexually, but more importantly also emotionally and intimately, with people that we shouldn't have relationships with. We need to protect not only ourselves, but we need to work to protect each other. In this case, they're talking as a brother, as parents. As parents, we need to make sure that we don't simply trust our children. We also need to actively protect them, sometimes from themselves. Because young people and old people and people in between don't always make the best choices. And it doesn't take much to open the door to something that door will never close. To something that will cause them problems for the rest of their lives. This is not only for those unmarried. We must protect the purity of the marriage bed even after the wedding. Do not put yourself into situations which could compromise that purity, and do not develop romantic feelings for anyone else. Notice I said do not develop, because you are a participant in the development of romantic feelings. When you share with somebody, you can be, depending on your proclivities, you can be developing a romantic relationship with people. There are times, especially at preaching school, the instructors warned, especially in counseling classes, warned the preachers, be included, in counseling women especially. Because especially a woman who's having trouble with her husband because he won't listen, and then you sit down with her and you listen to her, guess what? You have started to develop a relationship with her, and while that's not intrinsically bad, women like to be listened to. They do. And I had a hard time learning this. By the way, if you're a guy and your wife is talking to you about something awful that's happened to her, first, simply listen to her. Just listen. And respond in accordance, right, with answering her questions or whatever the case might be. Don't rush to fix it. That is classically a man thing, fixing things. Women don't necessarily want you to fix it, or at least fix it immediately. Sometimes they simply want you to listen. I can't tell you how long it took me to learn that. And then after I learned it, guess what? I forgot it and had to learn it again. Men and women are different. Uncommon to popular opinion in the world today, we're not the same. We don't think the same classically and generally. But generalities exist because they're generally true. It's not always the case, but generally, these generalities work. You need to protect your relationship. You need to be a shield or a wall. You need to protect the purity of the marriage bed both before and after. And if you find someone, both in your family or yourself, that's a dork, that's building and developing relationships they ought not, you're going to build a wall around them. Not in an aggressive way. Maybe it's yourself. Maybe you find yourself getting in relationships and emotional situations that you ought not be in. It's time to build a wall. And there are times where it's appropriate for a minister to say, I can't counsel you anymore. These are becoming issues, and this is an unacceptable situation. Sometimes knowing that you're in the deep end is the most important way of figuring that out. Or is the most important thing of being in the waters. Figuring out how well you swim. And not overestimating your ability to swim. This warning is really, really important. So important, she said it 3 times. And Solomon considered it so important that he recorded it 3 separate times in 3 separate circumstances. And so we look back and we say, wow, this Shulamite woman and Solomon think that this lesson is so important, they say it under 3 different contexts. 3 good reasons why you should wait for marriage, for a sexual relationship. And they didn't even cover the most important one, which is sin. They didn't have to go to the sin issue to say, this is really important to the future of your marriage and your future happiness, so much so that you should avoid it at all costs. But once it is time to engender and build and grow that relationship, do it passionately. Develop that passion. And again, notice I said develop, because your feelings are, to some degree, under your control. We like to pretend that they're not. We like to pretend that our feelings and our emotions and our attraction has only to do with who we are intrinsically. It doesn't. You develop relationships. You develop emotional relationships and intimate relationships with people, and it's a decision that you make. Agape love is a choice, and we'll turn to that. We'll stay here in Song of Solomon, chapter 8. Look at verse 6. Look at the emotion that's involved here, and look at the decisions that she is asking him to make. In verse 6, she says, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. If a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. You can't buy love. I think there's a song there, isn't there? You can't buy love. And that was true 900 years before Jesus was born. And it was true even before that. You can't buy love. You can't purchase it. That's what she ends with in verse 7. If a man were to give all the money he has for love, all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. You can't purchase intimacy. You can't purchase a relationship. You can't solve the problem of your marriage with money. It doesn't work. Time and effort and dedication is what does it. Once it's time, develop that passion. Make the choice. And the choice begins in that agape love that we point to, because while you don't entirely control your emotion or your attraction or the intimacy that you have, you do control your actions. You control how you treat people. Again, uncommon to popular belief, you have control of your actions. Or at least you can have control of your actions. Many people refuse to utilize that. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 4, probably very familiar to most of you. Love suffers long. That is a choice. It does not intrinsically happen. Love is a choice to suffer long. It's sacrifice. It is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. Is not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Thinks no evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things. Believes all things. Hopes all things. Endures all things. Love never fails, to finish up the first part of chapter 13 and verse 8 there. Those are all choices that we make. To suffer long and be kind, to not be haughty, to not behave rudely, to not be provoked, to think the best of the other person, to rejoice not in iniquity but in the truth, to believe the best of people, to hope that your marriage will continue and flourish if you work at it, that you will willing to endure what is necessary to make this marriage work. Those are all decisions. And you know what each and every one of those decisions does? When we make those kinds of decisions in our married life, with the person we either intend to marry or we have been married to for 1,000 years, you know what that does to that marriage? It strengthens it. It develops it. You want to build your marriage to be stronger than the world? Then love. Agape love. Sacrificially love. And your relationship will improve. The problem is that we do the opposite when it comes to the problems in our marriages. When problems start occurring, we start tearing each other down. We blame each other. We yell and scream and fight over sometimes the dumbest things, rather than listening and hoping for the best and talking things out and being humble and kind and patient. But when we make these decisions, it engenders what we call love, which is the feeling of love, which is attraction. And in most cases, issues with attraction stem from issues with actions. It's that we're not agape loving each other. It's because we're not doing the things we should be in most cases. You only control half of the relationship, let's be fair. But if both of you are investing in this agape love toward one another, if you're both treating each other the way you should be treating each other, and you're both loving and caring for one another, it will engender a romantic interest, an attraction. And you know how I know that? Because arranged marriages tend to work. In cultures where it is understood that both parties are going to not only have this marriage, but stay in this marriage, they have a higher success rate. And if you poll the people, and it has happened numerous times, they poll people from arranged marriage situations like that, and there are more happy couples than they are in places where they can choose and divorce at a whim. You know why I think it's that way? See, if you think about it, it makes sense. Because these people are committed to their marriage, they work on their marriage. But in places where we disregard everything and we discard anything that doesn't work immediately, we give up very quickly when the marriage starts to turn sour. Now, again, this is not to say that some marriages don't fail even though one person is really trying, because there are two people. But when both people work, it doesn't matter if you just met each other or you've known each other your whole lives. Marriages have to be developed. These feelings have to be developed. And why it's so important that these feelings aren't developed until such a time as you are married, especially the sexual element of them. Feelings of love are also important in a successful marriage. And so we should develop these feelings. Notice chapter 7 and verse 10 again. That's 1 Corinthians. There we go. Song of Solomon, chapter 7 and verse 10. Sorry about that. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. And what does she say to her beloved? Come, my beloved, let us go forth to the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Let us go up early to the vineyards. Let us see if the vine has budded, whether the grape blossoms are open and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes give off a fragrance, and at our gates are pleasant fruits, all manner new and old, which I have laid up for you, my beloved. What does she do? She wants to spend time with him. But what do you want to do? What productive thing do you want to do? I want to go on a walk. Well, if I'm only concerned with productive things, a walk doesn't really interest me. And that's the problem. A walk can be productive. Looking at the vine to see if the grapes are on it, and to look at the blossoms to see if they have budded. That's all she wants to do. But what is that? Developing the relationship through sometimes meaningless activity. And that's okay. You spend time together. You talk about the things that are going on. You share and you walk through the valley, through the vineyard, around the block, and you spend time developing those feelings. In Ecclesiastes 9, verse 9, it says, "Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life." You got to remember that the Song of Solomon is written before all of his wives, and Ecclesiastes, by and large, is written after all of his wives. And he says, "Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun," talking about God's giving you these days, "all the days of vanity. For that is your portion in life, and in the labor which you perform under the sun." He's saying, effectively, not in necessarily the politest of ways, she's a gift of God. So this time might seem meaningless at first, but if it's developing those feelings, if it's developing that relationship, if it's helping engender, it's helping your marriage succeed. And there are few things more important than that. There are a few, but there are a few things more important than that. And you know what's not more important than that? Making extra money at work. I mean, what do we sacrifice? Not only in our homes and in the name of our family oftentimes, especially in the culture that we live in today, what do we sacrifice in order to have more of the successful life that we already have? What do we sacrifice in our children and our wives and husbands and our families and in the culture that we live in and the morality that we pass on? What are we teaching our children to help them grow and develop and be good, not only human beings, but people that others would be interested in marrying to begin with? And then chapter 5, verses 1 or 2 and through 8. There's not really a point 3. This is point D. Point 2. Sorry. Don't take it for granted. Notice this. In Song of Solomon 5, notice verse 2. "I sleep, but my heart is awake." Now the question is, which doesn't ultimately matter, I'm more curious than anything, is she awake? Did she just wake up from slumber? Or is she having a dream like we saw in the past? And I'm not sure. It's kind of interesting, not really that important, so sorry about that. "It is the voice of my beloved," something awakens her. "It is the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, 'Open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one, for my head is covered with dew. It is likely very, very late. My locks with the drops of the night.'" So it's by the time the mist has come. She responds in her head, not out loud, "I have taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? I have washed my feet. How can I defile them?" Usually people wash their feet before they climbed into bed. And now she's going to have to get up. She's going to have to put a robe on. She's going to have to wash her feet again before she gets back into bed. And all of these decisions that she makes cost her precious time. Time that she thinks she has. But look at verse 4. "My beloved put his hand by the latch of the door, and my heart yearned for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock." Her beloved has tried to awaken her. And in her hate or her delay, he has culturally left a present behind. He has dropped some perfume or some cologne is what we would call it. His scent what he would traditionally wear. And you've seen this, I'm sure. People will spritz a love letter with their favorite perfume, and then they send it off. And when the person gets it, it's not just a love letter, it's also an olfactory sense that's triggered. And that's what they would have done. And so when she would have gotten up in the morning, he thinks he's being conning, and he is. He goes to see if she's awake, or if she can be awakened with a little bit of nudge. And she's not. And so he drops a note to her, effectively, that she will likely find in the morning when she goes to pull the latch on her door. And then he goes his way. And he leaves her alone. He lets her sleep. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and was gone. My heart leapt up when he spoke. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. The watchmen who went about the city found me. They struck me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took my veil away from me. I charge you, she says, verse 8, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him I am lovesick. And she goes on for this conversation between her and the daughters of Jerusalem, which is effectively the audience. And she keeps going back and forth, or someone off to the side of the stage, effectively, sorry, not the audience. And she goes back and forth between these two groups of people, and look what they respond, verse 9. What is your beloved more than another beloved? Now she could go, he's Solomon, right? He's the king. But that's not really the question they're asking. They're asking why we should help you any more than we should help anybody. Which is why I tend to lean that she's dreaming, both that she just got beat up by the guard, which could happen if they don't know she's the queen. But then this call and response between these two groups. O fairest among women, what is your beloved more than another beloved, that you so charge us? Why do you think you have the right to call on us? What did you just do? You let him slip through your fingers because you delayed, because you didn't engender your relationship. In this case, an obvious opportunity for them to spend the night together. And his life would have taken him far and wide, and his job as king would have been problematic to their relationship, which is the very thing she feared of at the beginning, if you remember. And she decided to marry him, and she decided to live with him in the matrimony. And in this case, anyway, she doesn't follow through. She doesn't remember that these relationships have to be worked for. Now, that's not to say it fails because of her, but you can't take your relationship for granted. And brethren, there's a reason. There's a reason Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. It's because he knew we were forgetful people. And I joke with my wife regularly, probably more regular than she likes. I joke with her and I told her that I loved her.